Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another deck tech on the Constructed Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, and I skipped last week. Um, there's a reason for that. I thought Standard was dead. That's all I had been playing, and I didn't want to just do a deck tech on something random because I actually would just play Boros aggro, the same thing that I did a deck tech with Matt 2 weeks ago. That is literally what I would play in Standard right now. Like, if you want to hit Mythic, you want a Standard deck, just go watch that deck tech. I promise you that you will beat Sultai. It's a great deck. Instead, I wanted to get into Historic. And so I want to show you what I've been doing and kind of talk about my progression a little bit in this format. So we're looking at my decks here. We've got obviously we have the mono white deck that I play sometimes. I've done a deck tech on that deck. Then we have the Citadel deck. Then I tried out Mason's red deck. Then I built a red deck. Then I tried Luke's deck, which I streamed. So if you want to check that out on the He's a Game Media YouTube channel. Then I tried Stompy. Then I tried Company Green. And now I am all in on this deck. Gruul Company, I think, actually really can compete. I've tried a ton of different things in this format. As far as, like, as we can see, I've played a lot of red and green decks. And I actually think that the deck that I'm about to show you is pretty good, and I will be playing it in the SCGs moving forward. So with that being said, let's open it up, and let's talk about it. You're going to think to yourself, looking at this, you're going to think, this is weird. Like, there's a lot of weird cards in this deck, Spencer. And that could be true. I believe in this deck. I think this deck is quite strong. I think this deck has exactly what it needs in this metagame. And I really appreciate, if you're not following, oh man, I'm going to get his name wrong. It's Robert, but I don't know. It's Fire Shoes on Twitter. If you're not following Lucas Faley, Rattleclaw, I can't remember all your names, but, you know, I took inspiration from a lot of different people. I've been playing basically nothing but Stompy decks and Gruul decks for the last week and a half, like almost 2 weeks now. And I have really, really enjoyed myself, and I think that we've come to a place that I really like where this deck is at, and I'm excited to talk about it. Let's go over the main deck first. We have 4 Llanowar Elves. The card is obviously really important. You know, Llanowar Elves is going to get you into your 3-drops. You play a lot of 3-drops in this deck. You have some modal 3-drops, which we'll talk about. But Llanowar Elves is, you know, when you have Llanowar Elves, your draw is really good, and it also is really important for being on the play post sideboard. Pelt Collector is really important in this deck as well, as it gives you another 1-drop that lets you be really aggressive when you don't have the Llanowar Elves, which is pretty important. You'll notice that I have Perforos's Intervention. This is something that I actually added to Lucas Faley's deck. So if you check out Luke and the things that he's doing, and I was really, really impressed with it. It's obviously like become a pet card of mine, but in all honesty, this card, if you just look at it on its surface level, right, and we compare it to Primal Might, right, the green and an X, fight target creature with X, right. This already kills more creatures. It also puts a 4-power creature on the board for things like Ronus, and it answers Planeswalkers for this deck. I mean, this card does everything this deck needs. And so if I'm looking for a second removal spell outside of something like Bonecrusher Giant, Perforos's Intervention actually does everything that I need. Obviously, it is, you're missing out on, maybe if you wanted to play Shock or something like that, and you wanted that instant speed removal, that's great. Shock is very good against Goblins. This deck is going to struggle comparatively against Goblins to some of the other decks. I don't think that you can deny that. But, you have game against a lot of different things. And if you prioritize killing things like the Prospector, it's okay that you're playing Intervention. It's possible that you could change up your sideboard to also fix some of those problems with Goblin. But Perforos's Intervention has really impressed me. Next up, we have Crawl Harpooner. This card has been a knockout of the park. I loved this card in Standard. I did not expect to be playing this card in Historic. people are playing mono blue in this format. People are just playing flyers all over the place. People are playing Gilded Goose. Like the number of times where like I'm on the play, I like play a Pelt Collector, kill their Gilded Goose, attack for two. I'm just like, GG's baby. Like you are in so much trouble because a lot of the times they don't actually have the red mana, for example, for their next play. And Crawl Harpooner being able to take out Goose plus being able to take out some of the stuff that people are doing in mono blue. I mean, obviously, it is good against some of the random stuff that people are doing, but also the fact that there is so much Gilded Goose in this format compared to probably how much there would be if it was something like Pioneer, just right now makes Crawler Pooter really good. Next up, we have Resilient Kenra. This is something that I got from a stomping list from Felix Solo. Uh, Holy crap, this card is way better than I expected. First of all, because we're playing company, it's actually really helpful to have ETBs like Kenrith and or Resilient Kendra and Crawl Harpooner in your deck. It gives you more modes to your collected companies. And also, it gives you something to do with your mana in the late game, which I really appreciated. We have 3 Scavenging Ooze main. I would probably just not play a green deck without at least 3 Scavenging Ooze main. This is probably the first one that I've played without 4 in the 75 for what it's worth. But I'm often boarding one, I'm finding at this point. Just because you only need to draw 1 usually. They're going to have to kill some of your other creatures. That's often more typical in the Stompy decks. I haven't run into like a really heavy removal spell deck outside of Sultai, which you're gonna beat with this deck anyway. But I do think that we have other things that we can do in the sideboard to kind of help with this. So, but I just think Scavenging Ooze is super important in the main. We do have 4 Bone Crusher Giant. One of the things that I really, really wanted. In fact, I don't even know if this Cultist is correct for what it's worth. Like. I think that it's possible that it should just be a second Ronus. But when I was trying to build my mono green deck, I was really upset that I didn't have Bone Crusher Giants, especially with Collected Company, because I want the appropriate number of 4 power creatures, but also that like aren't just these dumb nothing but that creatures, if that makes sense. Big dumb stuff is obviously interesting. I enjoy playing Stompy decks. But Bone Crusher Giant and Lovestruck Beast do something more interesting in these decks, that they stabilize you as well as feeding into your Ronus and things like that. And I think that's pretty important. It also gives you cheap removal against a lot of these decks. I have played a lot of Prey Upon in the last couple days, and I'm just not a fan. I think that just having something like Bone Crusher Giant is really helpful, and I'm really happy to play it. I just mentioned Lovestruck Beast. I think this card does a lot. I actually don't love 4. I almost wish that this 4th one was either like a questing beast. I wouldn't even be upset with that. If I like just cut this and a cultist for a questing beast, I might try that this week. I think that 2 questing beasts in the main, especially with these Emmercleaves, might be the way to go. I mean, if you look at the deck, right, we have these 23 lands with 4 elves. 23 lands is not a lot of lands, right? It's just not. But you only have 4 drops, and everything else is super cheap. So it's kind of about balancing, like, okay, well, what do you want the top of your curve to be? We have some flood insurance, right? We have Resilient Kenra, we have Scavenging Ooze, we have Perforasa's Intervention, we have Ronus. But it is important to know, like, what do you do when you do draw 6 lands? And that's important to think about. Ronus has been a slam dunk. I have been so impressed with this card. Obviously, this card saw some standard play in Teamer. It saw some play across a couple of different decks. It is way, way, way better in this deck than it ever was in standard. Whether you're playing mono green, whether you're playing Gruul, you should be playing Ronus the Indomitable. It actually is quite good. It is this indestructible thing that they can't deal with. It gives your creatures trample. It pumps your other smaller creatures so that it can attack and block. Like, this card does it all. It's a super aggressive threat. It's a really something important. Gruul Spoilbreaker is just great. Like, it's a super aggressive creature. It's really good against mono red. It does everything, and combined with Embercleave, obviously, it's just a slam dunk. Goldfish is something that I had been mostly sideboarding, but I did try this deck specifically, and this was something that if you look at Fire Shoes on Twitter, he was playing one in the main, so I wanted to go along with it because it had been so good for me that I was like, okay, well that's fair. Like, if we are saying that I'm boarding this in an X% of matchups, I think it's totally reasonable to play it. That being said, I don't know. Like, I do not find it turning into a creature as much in the main deck as I would like in game ones, but I think the card is still quite good. I cannot believe that I ever played any of these decks without Collected Company. I do think that, like, if you want to hit Mythic quickly, something like Lucas Faley's deck is actually really good. That's like a Gilded Goose Legion Warboss deck. But I think that Collected Company uh, is just better than trying to go all in on 3 drops, like all in on 3 drops, and going 1 to 3. It does a lot of the same things, right? It like helps you against Wrath. It lets you play during combat. I mean, obviously this card saw modern play. This card saw standard play. It's a great card. It does a lot for this format. And it's definitely something that I think that decks like this needed to compete. And overall, I think that, it lets you build your deck in a lot of different ways. Lastly, we have Emmercleave. I think this card is just really important. You need a way to break through in a lot of situations. And also, if you play an Emmercleave in game 1 or 2, they really have to respect it. And that is difficult. Like, it is a difficult card to play around. It wins games out of nowhere, and it really gives you incentives to attack with different things. Before we talk about the lands, I want to talk about some clear things that are missing. We have our 2-drop Satyr. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure I'll put it somewhere on the screen while I'm recording this. But, that card has been really good. But I honestly, I found the other 2-drops, Resilient Kenra and Crawl Pruner, to just be better. I wouldn't mind playing one, but once you're playing Ronus, right, you really want high impact spells in your deck. And while that card is good, the card has haste. A 1 in the 75 probably wouldn't be bad at all. I just haven't needed it just yet. The land base, we have 23 lands. We got 5 mountains, 8 forests, 1 hot ship oasis, 4 rootbound crag, 1 sheltered thicket, and 4 stomping grounds. So, if we're just going by the numbers, we've got 14 red sources and just a trillion D green sources. The green sources are really important, right? Like, we have these Llanowar Elves and these Pelt Collectors, Love Struck Beast on 1. I think if we look, we have 13 untapped green sources. Is actually 1 less than what you want for as many green 1-drops as we want. But, I think that, we could play another land. If I did, it would probably be a Sheltered Thicket. But it's important to make sure that your mana base is able to be consistent. And if we look at our sideboard, we actually just don't have that much expensive stuff, and we're never boarding out Llanowar Elves. And for that reason, I think that our main deck makes a lot of sense. We have 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 3 Lava Coil, 3 Legion Warboss, 2 Rampaging Ferocodon, 2 Deathgore Scavenger. That's right, the Dino is back, and I actually have not hated it. I've boarded it in way more than I expected. I tried it for fun, and I was quite impressed. 1 Reclamation Sage and 2 Shifting Ceratops. So, a couple things. I believe that there are other ways to build this deck. I already talked about the fact that you could play Questing Beast. I also think if you wanted to go more mid-rangey, you could play Karn. If you played Karn, you could play things like Sorcerer's Spyglass, the 6-mana Planeswalkers can activate, things like that in this format. I think that all of those are valid options. I think that because you've decided to be a Collected Company deck, though, I want to go in on Legion Warboss against certain types of decks. And I also want to have plays and draw sideboard plans, right? I want Legion Warboss on the play against a lot of decks. And because of that, and I'm playing Collected Company, I want to make sure that I'm maximizing that. Rampaging Ferocodon is a creature that I can get off Collected Company. So I'm going to play that over something like Tybalt. Deathgore Scavenger is this high impact card that also can help me enable Ronus and things like that. I think Reclamation Stage is an ETB effect instead of something like Thrashing Brontodon. Shifting Ceratops is this very large threat, can't be countered, has reach. It's funny because I've seen the Prowler, the 3 mana. I can't remember. It's like the snake leper thing, and I do think that that card is a consideration. But I think Shifting Ceratops is kind of what this deck needs. There was considerations actually for Garrick in this slot, but I wanted something that couldn't be countered. Um, and so it was between this and the 3 drop for me. Lava Coil is kind of important. I think that you do need removal, especially if you're playing against Stompy. Your creatures are actually a little bit smaller. So I do want more removal there. I was thinking against Citadel, exiling their creatures is really important, so I want stuff there. Overall, I think the sideboard is adjustable. I think I've already mentioned some of the things that you could do in the main deck. I will be playing this deck in the SCG qualifiers. I do believe in this deck. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I'm happy to answer. This deck will be evolving. I'll be streaming it. Head on over to twitch.tv/HeezyMedia to see me streaming this deck and decks like it. Be always improving. Give me a like. Give me a sub. It's greatly appreciated. Don't forget to check out the rest of the podcast over on the Constructive Criticism Network. And thank you so much to our sponsor over at puremdgo.com. It means the world. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed this video. This is just me dumping my thoughts. Very different from what I typically do on these deck techs. But this deck is evolving for me, and it's something that I'm really enjoying. And I hope you enjoyed this video too. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys all next time.